Hello and welcome to the Road from Emmaus podcast. I'm Jason Lowe, joined by Andrew Chow, and we are two totally ordinary Catholic guys hoping to share our journeys. Like the disciples on the road to Emmaus, we've each encountered Christ in our lives. Join us as we talk about what comes next. About a month ago, news came out that there had been sexual assaults and gender-based violence at Western University, the alma mater of me and Andrew. It was terrible to hear about and difficult to digest, and in this episode, Andrew and I try to get to the heart of the issue. The responsibility of being made man, and the gifts that God has written into our very bodies that we must be careful and loving stewards of. Also, we don't get into the graphic details of the news or anything, but sharing a warning just in case. So, I'm in a bad mood. I am a little bit pissed off. Today, on the day that we are recording this, the Jays were eliminated from being able to make the playoffs. It was an intense final day for those who care. The Jays are a baseball team, in case you aren't aware, and the Jays needed to win today. The Jays needed to win today, and they needed either the New York Yankees or the Boston Red Sox to lose. The Jays did their part. They won 12-4, but unfortunately, it was pretty close. Boston was losing for most of the day, so that was exciting. And then at the very end of the game, they came back and won. So that was crappy. I was unhappy. And then the Yankees were tied 0-0 for, again, most of the game. And at the very end, they came back and won. And so the Jays are not they don't make the playoffs. And I am in a bad mood. So apologies in advance if this episode comes out a little bit pissy on my end. But Andrew, why don't you give us your thoughts on how you feel about baseball?
I at one point I had asked my friend, not you, but a different friend who loves the Jays, to sit down with me and just teach me to appreciate the game. And because I was like, there's got to be something here. Too many people watch it for it to be like just as boring as I think. And then he was like, all right, so what I like to do is guess which pitch they're going to pitch before they do it. And I was like, I can't. Like, so yeah, that's how I feel. I want to go to a game though, because I feel like it's just an experience that like I don't have. And I mean, like, whether or not I stay for the whole thing, like, who knows? But yeah, I want to go to a game at some point.
I probably should have asked you, because I actually went to a game earlier this week when I told you I was downtown. And I was just like, I had considered asking you, and I was like, Andrew wouldn't be down. I'm not even going to bother. But next time I will. Next time I will actually ask you.
Yeah. Okay, sounds good.
So yeah, I mean, it's tough news for me. Again, I will be a little unhappy probably throughout the episode. But as you may have noticed, Andrew and I are back virtually this time after a couple of weeks off. I think we had planned to record a little bit earlier, but life got in the way, I think, for both of us, just in terms of busy schedules. So I'm sure our listener base was very eager to get our next episode. So thanks.
Devastated, just didn't know what to do with their lives.
Thanks for your patience, and hope you're not too pissy and too angry at us, but. I think on the topic of being upset, I think that's some news that we want to start off our episode with, is something both of us, I think, and a lot of people are upset with. About 3 weeks ago, there was something that happened at our alma mater, the university that both of us went to, Western University, University of Western Ontario. There was some news kind of coming out of Frosh Week, or O Week, or to the uninitiated, no pun intended, the orientation week, which is the first week that first years undergrad typically go through every year, just to get them into the university scene and the environment and everything. I think every university has this, just to orient their frosh. So if you haven't heard, what happened was about 3 weeks ago, I think first or second week of September. There was a big party at one of the residences on campus, and as is typically the case, again, at the end of O Week. And there were several reports coming out of the residence that There was a lot actually of sexual violence that had occurred, gender-based violence that had occurred, sexual assault. I guess, on that front, maybe it's probably me and Andrew's duty here to also kind of mention a bit of a trigger warning in case that's something that, that might affect you. Not that Andrew and I are going to get into that in any kind of graphic detail, but just in case, I think that's something that we want to bring up and just to mention out of courtesy. But yeah, it's a very unfortunate circumstance, I think, where I think up to like 30 cases of women who reported, either just being sexually assaulted or being drugged and then sexually assaulted, or just being drugged for the purpose of being sexually assaulted. All just terrible stuff to try and even digest, I think, to even try to read about. I mean, it kind of hits home closer just because both Andrew and I went to Western. But at the same time, that doesn't necessarily matter. It's not totally relevant whether or not it's at Western. But I think we want to use this kind of as a launching point to get into the rest of our episode. But just terrible news. Obviously, before we even continue on, we ask that you pray for them, pray for the victims, pray for the people who have been kind of in between, right? Like maybe who were just kind of there as bystanders, and also pray for those who may have initiated or been the perpetrators of this. Just for a change of heart, right? For God's mercy and grace to fall on them. Anything you want to add there, Andrew?
No, I think it's, it really does hit close to home, particularly for me, because it was actually in the residence that I lived in the first year. And so, it's really appalling. And I think, at the end of the day, what we want to take a look at is across the spectrum, how have we kind of misconstrued kind of these gender roles, and how have we kind of taken it too far in a lot of different ways. Big and small, right? I think, this is an extreme example, and this is one obviously that is very sorrowful, but there are lots of, microcosms of this as well in society. And we just want to touch on this a little bit and say, from a Catholic point of view, this isn't how we want to live, right? As lay people, we want to become good fathers to our children and good men for, the next generation that looks up to us. So that's kind of what we want to talk about today.
Exactly. So, you touched on whether it was fatherhood or, I think maybe even brotherhood, or, general friendship. I think kind of the overarching theme of our episode today is definitely the responsibility of being a man, of being made man by God, right? We'll have a little bit of theology of the body sprinkled into this, but I think we just want to touch on, with the obvious kind of theme from the news coming out of Western being, this is, again, gender-based violence, very much initiated, I think, by men who are kind of taking advantage of their, I guess, I don't know, roles of power or just, being stronger or seen as stronger, and kind of abusing that power. I think we want to dive into, like Andrew mentioned, from a Catholic point of view, how should we really be conducting ourselves, right, as men? How should we be behaving so that we don't get into these situations? Because I think a lot of the time, it's not like we wake up in the morning, I think, or it's not like the perpetrators in this particular piece of news woke up in the morning thinking, this is what I'm going to do, right? This heinous act or whatever. But I think it's very much something that you might have mentioned earlier in an earlier episode, where it's a lot of maybe smaller moments that build up and lead along the way to kind of creating the culture or creating the mindset that leads to these kinds of extreme results or outcomes that we wouldn't have imagined ourselves doing. But if you look back and you think about all the small things that came up along the way and the decisions that were made, or the choices that were made, it's kind of like, well, this is why you were involved in something that is so terrible, right? And so that's kind of, let's start there, right? We talk about small choices, we talk about the responsibility of men. And I kind of want to think about this idea of chivalry. And I think, at first mention of the term, you think of like the medieval ages, you think of like knights and I don't know, or like maybe you think to like Disney and you think of like, princes and Prince Charming coming to save their like, whatever. I don't think that's what we're talking about today, right? I think we're talking about being virtuous. What do you think?
Yeah, I agree. It's chivalry is almost like, I guess, a secular way of saying it. But at the end of the day, we're just talking about being an upright man. I think it's kind of what we mean in that sense. And it's really interesting because I feel like whenever this concept of chivalry comes up, it's looked at in one of two ways, right? It's either like, oh, that's such an old-fashioned notion, or it's, well, I open doors for women, right? And it's it's kind of just so simplified in a way that makes it seem like the actions are the point, and that it's kind of empty in those actions. I don't know if that makes any sense, but that's kind of something that really really strikes home for me. I said that like 3 times, but like it's in particular because growing up, I actually for a couple of years in my high school life, I went to an all boys high school. And it's actually really interesting because when we talk about the chivalry, in a sense, there is a direct opposite in my mind, which is kind of what's infecting society in a lot of ways, or potentially, might have been there for these young men who were part of these incidents, which is machismo, right? That like over manliness, that like men are all of these, like men don't cry, men are these like figures of absolute strength, and like all women should be submissive, and like whether or not it's like to that full degree, it's kind of, that's the balancing act here, right? Like how, I think this is where we want to kind of have our conversations. Where is that middle ground where it's a little bit more than just saying, I'll throw down my gauntlet on your behalf, my dame, right? It's kind of between that and the like, I can be a strong man for my household. In there, there's something that's really good in terms of men being strong. That doesn't go all the way to the like, my strength is like subordinate to nothing, right?
Yeah. Exactly. I love that you use the word strong so much, or strength. I think that's something that we should focus on, if anything, because there is, like you've already mentioned, this whole idea that to be a man is to be strong in all these different ways, where really that's not the case, right? We are called to be strong, but not in the ways that I think a lot of the times, fairy tales or whatever. I don't necessarily want to call out society and broaden it that way. Maybe it's applicable, but
sure.
Whatever. Whatever it is that, the outside world kind of bills it to be. I'm someone who definitely does not fall into those lines. I think definitely you and me, right? Like, if you talked about crying, both of us are criers.
Yeah.
So, that's just one example. So what is strength, right? What defines strength? And to me, it's, it's not so much, how much you can lift, or how little you cry, or how little emotion you show, or whatever it is. To me, strength is your ability to die to yourself, to sacrifice the things that you want, right? It can be something kind of trivial. It could be something like, giving up, I guess to be relevant to how I opened this episode, it could be something as simple as giving up watching a Jays game so I can spend time with my girlfriend, right? Because she knows that watching sports is something that I like to do in my spare time. And so it would be a bit of a sacrifice if you want to label it that way, if you have to label it that way, just so that I can spend time with her, right? It could be something trivial like that. It could be something big, like, I don't know, I don't want to virtue signal, call back to an episode or two ago. But, I think on a day-to-day basis, we are called to die to ourselves within the context of how we treat to bring it back to the theme of this episode, how we treat our significant others as who are women, right? To really strengthen the love that you have for this person, and to show that, you understand that this isn't about you, right? And I think this is actually a central theme to the responsibility that we have, and even a central theme to what happened at Western, right? With the sexual assault, with the gender-based violence. It's not about you. It shouldn't be about you. It should be about what you have to give up, what you have to sacrifice, whether it's from a sexual point of view, whether it's from a loving point of view, is really how I would actually term it. To the women around you, that's the responsibility that you have, and that we have as men, instead of just going out and being like, it's all about me. It's all about what I can get out of this, and this, what I can get out of this person. Right. And so to me, it's dying of self. To me, it's making it not about you. I don't know if that's...
Yeah. So yeah. I think I was going to say, I have a slightly different view on it, but I think it's very related and very in parallel to you. But the way that I look at strength in men is really founded on a man's integrity. I think it's a visible integrity, and what do I mean by that? I think it means that as a man, I understand who I am and what I'm about, and that's unshakable. To me, that's what strength is in men. And you know what, realistically speaking, to get there, you have to take a long, hard look at who you are. I don't think anyone, to your point earlier, I don't think anyone's going to say, okay, let me sit down, who is Andrew and who isn't Andrew? And I'll just say all right, Andrew is, a misogynist. No one's going to sit down and write that number one. There's going to be inherently a draw towards good things, and you take a hard look and you're like, these are things that I don't want to be, and then you build that. And to me, manhood really is understanding those likes and dislikes in terms of who I am today, building yourself up, and really standing by that growth that you're going for, right? That integrity of, I'm a man who struggles with patience. I'm a man who often, projects my own, my own gifts in ways that kind of looks down on others. So I struggle with pride. These are things that I don't like about myself that I'm committed to improving. And so my integrity will be, any time when someone calls me out on those, I acknowledge, yes, that was prideful. I shouldn't have done that. Yes, I was impatient. I shouldn't have done that. And that to me is far from weakness, right? In a lot of ways, a lot of people would see that as weakness. You're taking back something you said. You're not being a man. Well, no, I'm being a man because I'm recognizing that this is the growth that I committed to. And it is crucial for me to have the integrity to acknowledge that and to maintain that all the way through, regardless of what circumstance. And I think it really ties back, to what you were saying too. Yeah,
no worries. I just wanted to touch on what you were saying about how for you, a lot of what your manhood is based on is also just knowing that, who you are and, the foundational values, I guess, and principles and beliefs that you stand on, which I think is such a gift of how you've been formed, I think, right? Of how you've been, so involved in your faith life, of what your relationship with Jesus, what that reflects. That's such a beautiful thing where, you can call upon that to be well, because my goal is to get to heaven, and my goal, therefore, is also to live in the same way that Jesus did. That is how I strive to live my earthly life, and how I strive to live my relationships with those around me, including, again, to be relevant to this episode, the women around me, the woman I'm married to. And I think it's such a good reminder for many different groups of us, right? Right. The first group being, if you have been raised in an environment of being Catholic, of knowing God, of knowing Christ, you may have moments of weakness, right? We are you may have struggles with different areas of chastity, right? You may have struggles with pride, as you pointed out, or envy, or whatever it is. But you can, first of all, pray, call upon the Holy Spirit, pray to the Lord for the grace to get through those moments. But also from a practical, or that, again, I guess practical perspective, not totally the right word because praying is practical. From that perspective, just also remind yourself that, this is what you know. This is who you have been built up to be, shaped by the hands of God, to be someone who seeks virtue, to be someone who battles temptation and defeats sin, right? Mm-hmm. Now, that's the first group that I guess you and I fall into. But in another group where you may not have been formed in such a way, I think it just comes down to, love of your neighbor. I think that's something that all of us can identify with, regardless of whether or not you believe in God, regardless of whether or not you are a follower of Christ. Love of your neighbor simply cannot result in the outcome of what happened at Western, of the news that we just started off our episode with, right? Love of your neighbor means that you are looking out for the people around you, that you are being charitable. You may not be explicitly striving for the kingdom of God, but that doesn't stop you from being kind, from showing joy, from defeating envy and pride, all of those things, right? So I actually really like that you talked about how you were, how you are very much, a reflection of the things that you stand up for, that you believe in, all of those things. And I just wanted to quickly touch on that. I kind of cut you off, sorry.
No, it's okay. Yeah, I was just going to say, like, I think that's a really, really great point. And you know what? Like, at the end of the day, I think pursuing virtue isn't a purely Catholic thing, right? And at the end of the day, like, that's really what all this is about, is understanding which virtues you're pursuing, how you have shortcomings, and being really, like, truthfully committed to that growth. Right, that's really what I'm getting at here, and I think that integrity is to stay true to that. But the act of integrity, in a lot of senses, is that dying to self that you talked about. Right, I'm dying to these peripheral wants that I have because I made this commitment that I'm going to grow in virtue. I'm dying to, like, the Jays game because my commitment is to love your girlfriend and to discern the vocation of marriage with her. That's the commitment that you've made. And I think, at the end of the day, the question really, regardless of whether you're a man or a woman, is, like, have you done that assessment, right? Have you done that assessment of, like, where am I and what am I pursuing? Because I think it's one thing to generically say, I desire a relationship with Jesus. I think it's a beautiful thing, and that's something that we should all be doing. But the question, the part two, it comes quickly, right? The other shoe drops quick. That's not how it goes, but anyways,
it's okay.
It's how are you pursuing that relationship with Jesus? Man or woman, there is an element of integrity there. To me, manhood is that really visible, unshakable integrity, right? And that just, it's, no one can take that from you. That's what that strength is. I'm strong in that no one can shake my core. I think there's a lot to be said there.
Yeah, for sure. And it's like the whole thing of, males being in their position of power and kind of abusing that power is just, it's such a tiring narrative, in the sense of, usually when people say tiring narrative, it's like, oh, like, you guys are full of crap. Like, the narrative that you're spinning doesn't make sense. No, for me, when I say tiring narrative, I mean, I'm tired of hearing all of these stories of men abusing their roles, of being, whether it's protectors, people who initiate, all of these things, because it's true. It just keeps happening and happening, whether it's gender-based violence, whether it's, violence against children, whether it's anything like that. Just, again, men who are, whether it's physically or because of societal norms or preconditions and biases, are somehow in positions of power. Just abusing that power, abusing that responsibility of being made man. There are two things that piss me off. First thing is Toronto sports, as I mentioned off the top. The second thing is this this whole issue of men just being irresponsible with the gifts that they've been given from God, right? Starting from the beginning here, I'm going to cite obviously just a couple of Bible stories here, but starting from Adam and Eve, right? You know, everyone remembers that, like, oh, the serpent came to Eve, and the serpent, you know, tricked Eve into eating the apple, and then Eve even went and gave part of the apple to Adam, and you know, it's all Eve's fault. But, like, why was Eve alone in the first place, is my question, right? Why did Adam leave Eve? Yes, that's what I meant to say. Why did Adam leave Eve alone and unprotected and let her go wandering, in the sense of knowing that, you know, it might not have been a place that is totally safe to be like that, right? Or to go and wander. And then if you read on in the story of Genesis, he then tries to blame her, which is just a cowardice, really. But also a metaphor for so many of us males, including myself. I'm sure also including for you, where in some way or another, sometimes we just want to push off the blame, or sometimes we just want to shy away from, again, taking that responsibility of being accountable, right? Of just not being, like, this is strength to me, right? Strength is owning up to when you've done something wrong. That's all. Like,
yeah.
Why blame her, right, Adam? Another Bible story in the Old Testament, King David and Bathsheba. This king, you know, everyone remembers the story of David and Goliath. You read on in the Bible, and you hear about how great of a man and how great of a king David has become. And to this day, King David is cited at the, you know, kind of like when you talk about, like, the familial hierarchy, I guess, the bloodline, that's what I'm looking for, of Jesus, of Joseph. It's like, from King David, these people were descended. Yeah. And that speaks to, again, how great of a king he was. But that is not to say, again, that he also didn't have his moment of weakness, of abusing his power to force Bathsheba to have sexual relationships with him, right? To be with him. Mm-hmm. And then he went, like, again, the second step of making it even worse is he went and had her husband, because she was already married, killed in battle, right? Again, just this whole story, this whole narrative of cowardice, of men, you know, abusing their responsibility, abusing their power, if I haven't said it enough. The common themes of just selfishness and cowardice. And this is what I find, you know, if I were to extrapolate and take it out from the news of what happened at Western, that's what I see there as well. These common themes of selfishness and cowardice.
Yeah. You know, I think one thing you touched on earlier really kind of puts it all into perspective and shows how silly this is from our Catholic point of view. You know, one of the things that we talk about often enough is that, like, everything, and we talked about this a few times in the pod, everything is a gift from God, like, everything.
Yeah.
These times where people are in positions of power is another example of that, right? You talked about this, like, you know, you have received particular talents as gifts, right? So for myself, you know, I'm good at public speaking. That's not because I am amazing on my own power and by my own merits. There's nothing particular that I did differently from the next person growing up that meant that, you know, I've earned this talent. You know, like that would be just like anyone who says that about a talent. It's just like you look back and, like, that's not the case. So these are all gifts. To take that and then to be proud of it in a way that, you know, this is all me, is just silly. King David, his kingship obviously had nothing to do with him. You know, he was chosen. He was anointed. He was the youngest brother. You know, like, there's nothing about the situation that meant that he was supposed to be the one. You know, but God chose him. God put him into power. And then he says, well, now that I'm here, let me use this power for me. Like, it's just silly. And so I guess really the challenge for us is, like, are we doing this, like, big or small? Are we taking these different gifts that God's given us and not using them to pursue virtue, right? To tie it all back for us? Are we saying that we're not dying to ourselves? We're actually saying, because I have this talent, I'm going to do all these things for myself. Is this all about me, or is this about love of the other, like you said earlier?
Yeah.
Right? That's really what it comes down to at the end of the day.
Yeah. Yeah. I want to bring in a little bit of theology of the body here, just because I think it's important. Obviously, given the context of things like sexual assault, I think that's a very obvious tie-in. But I think when talking about the responsibility of being made man, you can't have that discussion without talking about theology of the body. And I'm not a TOB expert, and I guess neither are you. But I think all I want to say simply is just that it's written, the responsibility of being made man, of being man, of the gift that we have, is written into our bodies. Right? If you haven't thought about this before, if you've never received any kind of education, I guess, on theology of the body, God designed men to give, right? God designed men to act, to be the initiators, right? And I used that word earlier on, I think, when I was describing what happened at Western, of the men in these incidences, of sexual assault and gender-based violence. They were the initiators. There were probably a couple stories that actually got into very graphic detail about what happened. For the purposes of this podcast, and again, just for the sake of any trigger warnings or whatnot, I'm not going to go into those details, but they are available online if you are interested in reading it. Just to become more educated on the situation, you can message me or email me, and I can send you those links. But in reading through those stories, there's nothing more evident than how all the things that we've been saying, how the men in these stories, in these crimes, were just totally abusing the power that they had. Again, whether it was just because of the circumstance that they were in, or just because of their physical strength, right? And so to circle back to theology of the body, it is written into our bodies that we are the ones to give and to act and to initiate. And through those things of giving and acting and initiating, right, the woman's body is made to receive. That's how we create life, right? And what a gift. You just talked about gifts. What a gift it is to know that God designed male and female such that life can be created between them. And for us, in our positions as men, to be the initiators of that, what a big responsibility. And to underline the point, what a thing to not screw up and to not be irresponsible about.
I think when you say that, what comes to mind for me is also there's a dignity and a respect for yourself as well. I think given that this is this beautiful gift that's there, it's to water it down with so simple a base desire, to turn yourself into really a tool for earthly goals. It's just, I don't know how to describe it. It's like taking a Porsche to take out the garbage. It just doesn't make sense. We not only are built to be to be the initiators and to be the ones who give. We're the ones to initiate beauty. Mm-hmm. We're the ones to create beauty and goodness. And when we let ourselves become anything less than that, really what we're doing is we're saying, look, this is all I'm good for. God didn't make me for all this good stuff. God made me for this. And it's just, that's not the case, Mm-hmm. All of us are called to be something way more than that, way more beautiful than that. And really, take a hard look in the mirror, can you really look in the mirror and say, hey, you're some good stuff. There's something there that's beautiful, and you are part of God's miracle. What you find and I can probably say this with more personal experience than you, what you find when you start to head down these other avenues is that it's a lot harder to say that.
Mm-hmm.
Right? It's a lot harder to say, yeah, like you're part of something beautiful, because you're like, oh, but what about? But what about? But what about?
Mm-hmm.
Like, save yourself, guys,
Mm-hmm.
You can save yourself from all of those what abouts and just be like, if your what about is something like, I thought about stealing candy from the store, like you're in good shape, you don't want to be in these situations, because it just makes it so much tougher to receive. Because we also, as much as we're made to give, we also need to receive. And if we can't even do the one function, then it just becomes more and more layers that are stopping us from getting to where we need to go. So yeah, just don't make yourself into something cheap.
I think that's a perfect segue of, obviously a lot of our discourse today has been specifically directly directed towards the males, right? The male audience in the ways that we're speaking. But I think if there was something that I want to say to any women who are listening, it's don't cheapen yourselves by settling for something that's cheap, right? Women are so beautiful. Their gift is just as beautiful because God designed it that way. We are equally beautiful in our own unique ways, whether to give or to receive. I think that's something that so many people struggle with, is a lot of what society preaches is that you can settle for something that is cheap. Mm-hmm. And that's just sad, right? And it's a tragedy. And, there are temptations of like, I don't want to spend the rest of my life alone, or, pressures from family, or pressures from, again, society and friends, or whatever it is. But God, first of all, made you beautiful. And if you are being called to the vocation of being with someone, of being married, God has someone beautiful in mind for you too, right? Mm-hmm. And regardless of whether you're being called to a vocation of marriage or a vocation of being single, or obviously of a religious vocation, God himself is also beautiful. BT dubs. So that's something to cling on to as well. We are all made in the image of God. God himself is beautiful. You are beautiful. You are a gift. And as we kind of wrap up here, I want to kind of talk about like, how should we proceed, or what should we do, right? As always. And I want to bring up a Bible verse from Matthew chapter 5, verses 27 and 28. Again, just relevant to the news that came out of Western 3 weeks ago. Concerning adultery, you have heard that it was said, you shall not commit adultery. But I say to you that everyone who looks at a woman with lust has already committed adultery with her in his heart. I specifically cite this Bible verse because I just want to touch on what I mentioned earlier of, people probably, hopefully, don't wake up in the morning thinking at 10 p.m., 11 p.m. tonight, this is what I'm going to do, and it's going to be a terrible thing. But what happens is, along the way, you could be finding yourself checking out someone who's attractive just on the streets. Along the way, you could be looking up pictures of pornography, watching pornography. Along the way, you could be thinking, oh, this person in my life, like, I don't know, falling into the temptation of like, this is how I would use them or something. Just, just some kind of, immoral thoughts, things like that. Yeah. And obviously this piece of news is centered on things like, unchastity and sex. But if you are struggling with other, deadly sins or sins in general, I'm sure there are similar kinds of temptations along the way that lead you to fall to those sins. But Matthew chapter 5, verses 27 and 28, right? Everyone who looks at a woman with lust has already committed adultery, has already committed that sin in his heart, his or her heart. And I think that's just something to remember where, all of this is something that is a culmination of the little moments along the way, of the mindset that you form for yourself, of, the foundation, like we talked about earlier, that you have built to stand on, that is now being reflected from you, right? And so what do you do in the case of this, right? The verses go on, verse 29 and 30. If your right eye causes you to sin, tear it out and throw it away. It is better for you to lose one of your members than for your whole body to be thrown into hell. And if your right hand causes you to sin, cut it off and throw it away. It is better for you to lose one of your members than for your whole body to go into hell. Right? Is Jesus suggesting that you literally take a knife and chop off your hand, or gouge out your eye? Maybe not quite, but is it your phone, right, that you can maybe get rid of, right? Can you convert from a smartphone to an old school Motorola Razr for a few months or something like that, right? Or whatever other temptation it is that's leading you to sin. Can you get rid of that so that you can place yourself in a better position and not end up in a spot where you're committing this much bigger sin and regretting it later on?
Yeah, I think, this is such a great way for us to end off, because what I want to call to mind in those first two verses is that Jesus is very specific. He doesn't say, when you look at a woman, you have already committed adultery. It's when you look at a woman with lust. So let's be clear here. There is beauty all around us. And recognizing beauty is never a bad thing. It's the overreaching of that appreciation for beauty. It's this woman is beautiful, so this is what I want to do to her. That's where you've headed down the wrong path. If it's this woman is beautiful, ask yourself, what is this beauty trying to call me towards? Is this, like dating is a great example. Many, many people date women, date men who they don't end up marrying. Does that mean you have to drop the relationship and feel like that never happened? No, there was something beautiful there that you need to recognize. That could be in a friendship, right? So I just really want to call that, it's not, put on the blinders, never look at anyone. It's learn how to recognize beauty for beauty's sake, not for your own sake. I don't want to go too far into this because this could become a whole other episode, but I think one of the resources that hopefully we can, or I will say we will link in the chat or in our description afterwards, is a couple talks on Catholic morality that Father Kevin Belgrave gave as workshop talks for one of the years for GT. I think it was your year of GT20.
Yeah, GT20.
GT20, yeah. One of the years at our GT retreat. Because that was really, really good. He talks about how Catholic morality is a combination of understanding the virtues and the map that gives us towards sainthood, and kind of our own consciousness in terms of being the GPS to tell us in like the now, where do I go? And one of the things he talks about, to your point, is put yourself in a situation to succeed. In different words, if you struggle with lust, get rid of the things that you normally go to for those lustful sins. If it's, I'll talk in my example, if it's bringing the phone to the bed, then stop bringing your phone into your room. Do the little things that mean your environment no longer leads you down that path. But anyways, Father Kevin delivers it far better than I do. So really, I'll encourage you guys to check those talks out.
For sure. Okay, I will include those links in the description. So I think we're going to have to call it a wrap there. It's been a bit of a longer episode. I actually did want to spend some time, perhaps I'll try to do it quickly, of just recognizing when we release this, it'll probably be about a week after the September 30th National Day of Truth and Reconciliation, which was beautiful. I was able to attend, the Archdiocese held kind of a prayer service, Archdiocese of Toronto live streamed a prayer service, and I was able to watch that. And it was very nice. I think just to kind of, we were able to see some of the culture from the Indigenous, and these were Indigenous Catholics, I believe, I'm pretty sure, who participated in this prayer service next to Archbishop Cardinal Thomas Collins. So, I bring that up because, we had an episode on it, but the idea is that the discussion shouldn't stop, obviously, right? The prayers should not stop. I believe, efforts are still underway to see if there are more mass graves depicting this tragedy, right? So, continue on with recognizing the Indigenous peoples and what's been happening there. And the Canadian Conference of Catholic Bishops did recently formally state their apology. So that was heartening, I think, at least on my end, to see and to read. And there were there was also an additional pledge, I think, of a monetary pledge over the next, I believe, 5 years. I should have gotten the number. I don't have it handy, but a pledge from the bishops for Indigenous causes. So, just want to quickly touch on that before we sign off here. I guess a bit of a heavier episode with the way, with what this episode was about and with the way that we're ending this. But we thank you for coming along for the ride, I guess. We ask that you keep all of these parties in your prayers, right? Because, they need them. And we pray for society and the world as a whole, again, for that change of heart. So you'll hear from us in a couple of weeks, and until next time, hope you all take care.
Have a great Thanksgiving, everyone.